Time has a way of layering itself. Some moments sink so deep into history that no one remembers they ever existed. I stepped into one of those moments. Ice Age Eurasia, 18,000 years ago. The cold felt immediate and unforgiving. I stood at the edge of the village shaped entirely by survival, knowing I didn't belong in this time. I didn't enter right away. I watched from a distance, learning that hesitation here carried consequences my own era had forgotten. I studied the ground like a language still forming. Every mark in the snow told a story older than memory, shaped by lives that existed without record. When I finally offered my hands, there was no questions. Effort mattered more than origin. I watched the villagers tend to the fire with steady patience. In that quiet attention, I saw life refusing to surrender. I returned again and again, not to change anything, only to understand it. Work here carried weight I wasn't used to. Every action mattered because tomorrow was never guaranteed. As we dragged the log together, the cold burned into my hands. For the first time, exhaustion felt earned, not avoided. From above, the village looked fragile, but I'd seen stronger-looking places collapse in my own time. This one endured. As the months went on, their routines became familiar, not because I belonged, but because I was allowed to remain. I followed their paths in silence. Some knowledge isn't taught, it's absorbed. Day by day, life here didn't rush, it repeated. I worked beside them without explanation, and they accepted me without needing one. Even knowing I didn't belong in this time, I felt connected to it. Presence, I learned, doesn't require permanence. The sky burned quietly above the village. For a moment, time felt distant and irrelevant. Beside the fire, the warm heat moved between us. It was never about the flame, it was about what gathered because of it. Snow erased the marks of my earlier visits. The land reminded me how quietly presence fades. I felt pride I had no claim to, and accepted it anyways. I helped strengthen shelters no future would ever name, and I understood how much of human life goes unwritten. Walking their paths again, something became clear. Time doesn't rush. People do. At the edge of the village, light dissolved into shadow. I stood still, knowing this moment could never exist the same way again. From above, the fires looked like constellations meant only for the present. I watched without trying to keep them. Strength here was never loud. It lived in hands that kept working despite the cold. I watched the frost shimmer briefly, then vanish. It was very reminiscent of my time here. You see, I had first seen life refuse to surrender beside the fire, and now I understood. It never needed me to continue. I left Ice Age Eurasia without a trace, but I carried something forward with me. A quieter respect for endurance, and the knowledge that long before history tried to remember itself, people endured, and to them that was enough. I visited Earth before humans existed. I thought I would feel amazed. Instead, I felt unnecessary there. There was no welcome, no sense that I had arrived early or late. The world was already moving. The wind crossed the land without hesitation. The oceans breathed as if they had never learned how. Mountains stood unmoved, by names, by memory, by witness. Nothing was waiting for us. Nothing was missing us. Life didn't slow because no one was watching. I walked across land that had never been shaped by roads, never measured, never divided, never owned. And for the first time, there was nothing asking me to matter. The sky felt wider then, not because it was different, but because nothing tried to hold it. Animals moved without fear of being remembered. They weren't performing, they weren't surviving for history. They were simply alive. I stayed longer than expected, long enough to notice what it carried with me. The need to be useful, the need to be seen, the need to leave something behind. None of it belonged here. The silence wasn't empty, it was complete. Nothing needed to happen. And in that stillness, something in me finally loosened. For the first time, I wasn't the center of the moment. Earth wasn't waiting to become something else. It already was. Whole, undisturbed, enough. I thought I'd feel lonely. Instead, I felt relieved. Like being allowed to rest inside something vast. Something that didn't need meaning to exist. When I finally left, nothing changed. The wind kept moving. The oceans kept breathing. Life continued, unaware that it had ever been observed. Earth existed long before we arrived, and when we finally did, the world would never be this quiet again. Thanks for staying on this journey with me. For millions of years, the world existed without humans, shaped by nature alone. When humans finally appeared, we weren't at the top of the world, but slowly, one animal began to stay close. That moment led to man's best friend. I arrived in a world where companionship didn't exist yet, and no one knew they were missing it. Survival came first. Everything else came later. Humans stayed close to one another, not out of warmth, but out of fear. The nights were long, the dark pressed in from every direction, and no one watched it alone by choice. That's when I noticed him. He stayed beyond the firelight, where the warmth ended and danger began. The others saw a threat, a shadow with teeth, a reason to keep weapons nearby. But he watched the darkness the same way they did, still, alert, listening for what moved when no one was looking. Night after night, he returned, and night after night, the distance remained. Not because either side wanted it to, but because trust hadn't learned how to cross it yet. Scraps were left behind, not as kindness, just because there was too much to carry. And for the first time, he chose hunger over fear. The fire meant warmth, the humans meant leftovers, and staying nearby meant surviving one more night. The nights grew colder, the fire burned lower, and the silence between them shortened. Then one night, the dark moved. He noticed it first. A sound, a shift, a warning without words. For a moment, no one knew who the warning was for. The humans reacted, and realized they weren't alone in watching the night anymore. The night passed without violence, then another, and another. The firelight reached his pause. He didn't step back. He wasn't owned, he wasn't trained. He simply stayed. The hunts grew easier, the warnings came sooner, the dark felt further away. Slowly, the firelight stopped being a boundary. Watching it happen, I understood why this bond never broke. History would later give this moment a name, but standing there, it felt simpler than that. Two survivors, choosing not to walk through the world by themselves anymore. And for the first time, humans stopped being alone. I didn't travel here to change history. I came to see what time looked like before we existed. When I first arrived here, it felt like stepping into the opening chapter of Earth's story. Everything was massive, untouched, and unaware of what would come next. I wasn't visiting the past, I was standing inside time itself. As the weeks passed, fear slowly made space for wonder. Sharing the river with Triceratops made the world feel steady and alive. Life had been thriving here for ages without ever waiting for us to appear. By the second month, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt intentional. Watching a stegosaurus move through the grass, I realized how brief my own lifetime truly was. Millions of years passed quietly like this, without needing witnesses. When the herd moved as one, their calls echoed across the land. It felt ceremonial, practiced by time itself. Our entire human history suddenly felt like a footnote. The forest felt like a living archive. Every creature was a sentence written long before us. I wasn't here to change the story, just to witness it. The Brachiosaurus moved like part of the Earth itself. Its size erased every human thought. This planet had never been centered around us. By the water, even armored creatures found rest. Peace wasn't created by civilization. It existed long before us. I was stepping into patterns far older than memory. Standing at the shoreline, I lost track of what era I belonged to. The ocean felt unchanged and uninterested in timekeeping. I started to wonder if time was less a line and more something we passed through. In the tall grass, watching iguanodons feed, I felt unexpectedly calm. Not because I belonged here, but because belonging didn't seem required. When storms rolled in, the sky reminded everything who was in control. Thunder hasn't changed across ages, only the ones listening to it have. These footprints hadn't become history yet. They were still a moment in motion. I was watching time being written, not remembered. The young Brachiosaurus moved with quiet confidence. Every age believes it's the beginning of something permanent. Time always keeps a longer view. Sitting by the fire, I realized I was the only human for millions of years in either direction. The flame belonged to my future. Everything beyond it did not. For the first time, that distance felt heavy. When I saw the shape on the ridge, beauty sharpened into danger. This place wasn't cruel, it was honest. Every era has teeth. As the predator passed, I stayed completely still. In that silence, I understood this fear wasn't unique to me. It connected every creature that ever tried to survive. The river felt like a moving timeline. Water that once flowed past dinosaurs would one day pass through cities. I felt suspended between both. Not lost, just momentarily unanchored. The sky burned red as the sun disappeared. Sunsets have outlived every species before us. Endings here don't feel tragic, they feel familiar. In the canyon, echoes layered one over the other like overlapping memories. I wondered if our era would someday sound just like this, distant, faint, preserved by stone. In a quiet clearing, I watched a small herbivore move through the grass. Nothing dramatic, just life continuing. Not every chapter is written in struggle. Weeks later, I studied a small feathered dinosaur watching me from nearby. I thought about birds in our time and how the past still travels with them. The distance between eras felt thinner. The dry plains felt like a pause in the planet's story. No urgency, no movement, even stillness, I realized, is part of change. When the rain finally returned, the land seemed to exhale. Renewal wasn't invented, it's always been here. Earth has practiced starting over for a long time. At night, the world filled with sound again. Calls moved through the darkness like an ancient song. I wasn't meant to understand it, only to listen. Looking out across the valley the next day, I could trace the path I'd taken. Every fear and every quiet moment connected into one experience. I finally saw my time here clearly, a chapter, not a book, and somehow that made it enough. When I returned to the river, it looked unchanged. The difference was me. I wasn't searching anymore, I was listening. And you see, what I realized is I wasn't important here, and for the first time, I didn't need to be. When the ground trembled, animals responded instantly. The earth is always moving forward, whether anyone is watching or not. 2 weeks later, I watched a massive herd move across the valley. They weren't searching for something new, just following what always was. My journey suddenly felt like part of something much larger. As the sun set over the ancient world, the truth settled quietly. I wasn't here to claim the story, I was here to remember it, and then let it continue. The deepest lesson I learned is that time will keep moving, with or without us. The least we can do is listen. The world once belonged to giants. Footsteps shook the ground, and then silence. Ages passed in a breath. Forests changed, rivers learned new paths, and eventually, humanity returned. Not with empires or stone, but with wagons, hope, and uncertainty. This was the Oregon Trail.